Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Bourne, Deputy Director for Commercial Development here at the University. I'll explain what that actually entails in a bit more detail in due course. I'd like to welcome you all to this year's Innovation Marketplace meeting, in which we aim to provide an insight into the way the university commercializes the outcomes of its research. Just to put this into context, it's estimated that over the next 10 years, the university's external research income will total over £1 billion. So these are grants and contracts that the university will win competitively from a range of funding sources, including UK government, research councils, from industry, from the European Commission, from charities and from overseas sources. Now, whilst we recognise that not all of that money will be directed towards new products and processes, it is nevertheless, particularly with the infrastructure of the university, a significant investment in new research and the generation of new intellectual properties. And it's our role to help identify appropriate opportunities, to protect them, potentially through patents, and to commercialise those opportunities. I'm delighted to be joined today by David Baines, who's the CEO of Fusion IP, and David will tell you more about the Cardiff Fusion Partnership, and also by Stuart Gall, who is the CEO of one of our spin-out companies, Metaphor Limited. And the panel will answer some questions at the end of the presentations this morning, which have already been submitted ahead of the time, so at least we know what's coming. And we will also be running two interactive sessions, two workshops at 11:30, one for academic staff and one for businesses. So if you do have any burning questions, I'd be very appreciative if you could hold on until those workshops. And finally, lunch will be available from 12:15. But before we begin the presentations, I just need to advise you of one or two housekeeping rules. Firstly, just be aware that the fire exits are to the rear and the front of the lecture theatre. And can I also remind you, if you haven't already done so, to turn off your mobile phones, please. Thank you. So turning to the topic in hand, commercialising intellectual property opportunities. The first thing I think to say about this is that, technology transfer this is what we call technology transfer, and it's the commercial development of research ideas and intellectual property into commercially viable products or processes that meet defined market needs. And the first thing to say that from a university perspective, this is quite a high-risk activity. There was a study in 2008 called the Wellings Review. This was done by Professor Paul Wellings. He's the Vice-Chancellor at Lancaster University, and he was commissioned by government to undertake this study. And he found in the US that only 1 in 1,000 patents ever generates more than $1 million worth of royalty income. And yet the cost for us in the UK, as some people in the audience may be aware, of just filing 1,000 patents would be between £3 and £5 million. And so he concluded that the economic benefit from technology transfer was not to the universities, but rather to the economy. It's also a long-term activity. There was a study last year by the Russell Group of universities, of which Cardiff is a member, and they looked at over 120 case studies, and they found that the average time from an invention through to some kind of deal, whether it was a spin-out company or a license, took 9 years. And in fact, the time for a significant commercial return to the university, either through a company exit or significant income, was actually 17 years. So it actually begs the question, why do universities get involved in this activity at all? Well, the main reason, I think, is today is because of something called the Research Excellence Framework, or the REF, as we've come to know it within the university. And that has some serious implications for us, because it's the way in which we will be assessed, and it also has implications for our funding. So it's quite a big deal for us. And part of REF actually talks about the impact of our research. So it's not enough now just for universities to do excellent research. They have to show utility. They have to show how this research is utilised in the real world. But long before REF, there was a lot of government interest in this area. And this was highlighted by a number of high-profile government reports, perhaps the most important of which was Lord Sainsbury's The Race to the Top, which was published in 2007. And it actually makes reference to Cardiff University's relationship with Fusion IP. And in fact, Lord Sainsbury actually visited Cardiff and discuss the contents of this report with selected staff from the university. But government agenda aside for a moment, there are actually benefits to us within the university of undertaking technology transfer. Many of the researchers and inventors that we work with are highly motivated to see the outcomes of their research developed and utilised in some meaningful way. It can also help encourage further collaborations. Clearly, if industry have benefited from collaborations with the university, they're more likely to come back and work with us again. It can also help bring what we call reality into the laboratory, and I think this is something that's very important for us. It helps inform our research, it helps inform our teaching, it helps give us an insight into the needs of industry, so it adds a lot more relevance to what we do. And it can also create employment opportunities, either by making our researchers more employable or by creating new employment opportunities in their own right, such as through spin-out companies. And last and least, it generates income. So for us within the university, technology transfer is not primarily about making money, but nevertheless, if we do it well, we will inevitably generate income. And it is the best kind of income because it's unfettered income. Now, having said it's not really about making money, there is perhaps one exception, and that's when we talk about spin-out companies, where successful companies and profitability tend to be very closely related. I just want to say a little bit about the process. It's essentially one of creation through to commercialization, and the two vehicles for commercialization are either the granting of licenses to existing companies, and I'll talk a little bit more about Cardiff's work in this area, or the creation of new spin-out companies, which is something we'll hear more of from Fusion. And the analogy is that licenses are a bit like marriages. It's about long-term partnerships. And once the honeymoon is over, you've got to work together for a long time. And breaking up the partnership can be expensive, and only the lawyers get rich. Apologies to my colleagues from the legal profession. If licenses are like marriages, then spin-outs are a bit like parenthood. Certainly at Cardiff, we take a very hands-on approach to our spin-out companies. We start with intellectual property, and then we add money and management. And we do tend to focus on those high-growth opportunities for spin-out companies. But long before we get to this stage, if you remember the previous slide, we've got this 9-year development gap, and that's where my team within the university spend most of their time, working with academic staff to add value to the initial research, to the initial idea. And we achieve this usually through protecting the IP through patents and the like, and by applying for proof of concept or follow-on funding to help add value to the initial research. And what we've seen in recent years is that most of the research councils have now introduced some kind of follow-on fund to help with this process. And in addition, we've also benefited from our own proof of concept fund. This was the Cardiff Partnership Fund. This was established under a government initiative called UCSF, or University Challenge Fund, about 10 years ago now. And since that time, we've funded some 38 projects, including 11 spin-outs. And those companies and projects in turn have levered in a further £46 million during that period. So we've seen huge benefits from having this fund, and Cardiff was one of only 15 funds set up originally, and the university contributed £1 million of its own money to this fund. And this graph just shows some work that was done by Cambridge University last year, just to show where Cardiff ranks in terms of the University Challenge funds and the amount of follow-on fund that it's been able to lever. And in fact, it was the board of the Cardiff Partnership Fund, 2/3 of whom are external to the university and included our Vice-Chancellor, that concluded that if we were going to manage our spin-out activity in any meaningful way, then we needed additional expertise and resource. And consequently, we spent about 18 months working with Gambit Corporate Finance, with Godfrey Ainsworth, reviewing a number of options. And to cut a long story short, in January 2007, we signed an agreement with Fusion IP. And that's probably an opportune moment to hand over to David Baines of Fusion IP.